Given all the recent publicity that the unfortunate Florida shooting has received in the media, I felt it necessary to at least try to set the record straight on several points. I think there are so many issues that are being thrown around that we at least need to narrow the focus and the scope so that we can have a meaningful discussion with the hope of reaching some meaningful resolutions. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that uninformed citizens and the liberal media are pointing blame for the tragic Florida shooting incident on a number of different sources, like, believe it or not, the NRA, politicians who receive funding from the NRA, President Trump, Florida Governor Rick Scott, other GOP legislators who received funding and who they claim also refuse to implement what they consider to be common sense gun laws to stop such atrocities. Now, that's a common response for many of the uninformed people when bad things happen, is that they immediately start attacking the thing rather than addressing the behavior of the individual. Let's start this conversation today with what we know about this particular incident. There's an ongoing investigation that is yielding additional information on a daily basis, if not on an hourly basis. While we're engaging in this discussion today, there are things becoming known that weren't known before this point. What we know about this point is that a crazed gunman took a firearm onto school property, a felony, a major felony. He committed mass murder, killed 17 people, 17 counts of capital murder, potentially punishable by the death penalty, and he injured numerous persons with a firearm. Each count carries with it a felonious crime and a penalty. What we know from the beginning is that the individual committed 3 felonies that had multiple counts, many of which carried the ultimate penalty, which would be death. He reportedly posted on YouTube that he was, quote, going to be a famous school shooter. This phrase that he posted on YouTube was found by an individual who, being a responsible citizen, called the FBI, notified them of what he saw. The FBI sent out 2 investigators who followed up on the case, interviewed the person who found it, but for whatever reason, the FBI was unable to make a direct link between the comments that were made on YouTube and the gunman in this particular case. He was reported to have pictures of firearms on his social media. His friends said that he obsessed over them when he showed them to his friends. He had online affiliation with radical groups. He reportedly tortured pets. It's reported that he'd been expelled from the school where he committed his atrocity a year before for getting involved in fights and carrying ammunition in his backpack. Fellow students allegedly claimed before this incident that the killer would likely be the one to shoot up a school if that sort of thing ever happened at that school. Now think about this. I've provided you with some factual information. I'm providing you with some additional information, and it's pretty alarming that with all this stuff, this individual wasn't detected in the system, so to speak, that people are claiming that we need to enhance in order to mitigate against such incidents. But let me continue. Numerous school staff and unspecified other individuals claim that the individual had psychological or emotional problems and that he was, quote, odd, unquote, whatever that meant. His stepmother told school officials, because of the numerous dealings she had as the parent of a problem kid in that school system 2 years ago and before, that she had serious problems dealing with him and that he had emotional problems. After his stepmother died, I think within the past year, it's reported that he's going inward and he's changed residences from place to place, living with different friends. He's 19 years old. He reportedly lawfully purchased the AR rifle that he used in the state of Florida, which authorizes people 18 years and older to buy rifles, but not handguns, as is the case with in many states. Specifically here in the state of Ohio, you can purchase a handgun when you're 21, you can purchase a rifle when you're 18. So that's not too terribly uncommon. So much for seeing something and saying something. That's good advice. But it didn't work in this case for the individual who pointed out the YouTube video and for several people who talked about some of the problems this killer had in his prior life. Now to my main point. Given all we know, and there will undoubtedly be more information, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to come out on a daily basis as the investigation progresses, what could possibly have been done by the NRA, politicians who received NRA funding, President Trump, Governor Scott, GOP legislators, local, state, and federal law enforcement officers, school officials, members of the community, or fellow students to stop this atrocity? I argue virtually nothing could have been done by any of them to stop this atrocity. I propose that the one potential thing that could have been done to minimize the death is arming the security officer, football coach, who could do nothing more than heroically put his body between the killer's bullets and the kids that the killer was shooting at. I personally do not think anybody should serve as a security guard without being armed, because they are instantaneously a target when a bad guy comes into a situation. I know people will criticize me for promoting such a position, but it is the only answer to the question that those people ask about what could have been done to stop this incident. Keep in mind that the simple fact is that the most common resolution for such active killer incidents is when an armed, ready, willing, capable person on the scene shoots the killer or confronts the killer and either forces them to flee the scene, the target-rich environment, forces his or her surrender, or causes the killer, in many cases, to commit suicide. And that's based on the many incidents across the country, in schools, in businesses, and in other locations where active killer situations have been resolved. Again, ready, willing, capable, armed citizens bring resolution to the majority of the situations around the country where the killer doesn't kill himself during the incident itself. One more thing. If the liberal politicians who are so quick to wrongly point the blame really cared about the victims and their families and the broader American population for that matter, they would stop trying to legalize illegal immigration and pass the darn Nix Fix and National Concealed Carry Reciprocity Bill that has been put on the back burner since November of 2017 so that they can argue how to make other illegal acts legal relative to the immigration debate. Pretty amazing, very frustrating, and I think frustrating to a lot of people out there. Pass that one piece of legislation which contains some major revisions to the background check system, and that could serve as a segue to additional legislation to improve the mental health system related to preventing psychologically or emotionally disturbed persons from getting guns and using them illegally. Many of the same feel-gooders advocate an assault weapons ban to solve such incidents. How uninformed they really are. They obviously haven't looked at the facts or the circumstances surrounding previous incidents. Although several recent mass killers have used such firearms, the majority of firearms used in the majority of the previous mass killer situations were not such weapons. It is not the object, the gun, the truck, the plane, the pressure cooker, all which have been used to kill many people in many tragic incidents in this country over the last several years. It's not those things that are the problem, but rather it's the mental state and motivation of the killer that needs to be the focus. The problem is people don't want to address that issue because it's a hard issue. I just want people to look at the facts, not rely on conjecture, not rely on emotion, and think about what we can do. Right now, relative to schools, there are schools around the country who are following the lead of the Buckeye Firearms Association and schools in Ohio that are implementing the FASTER program. And FASTER stands for Faculty, Administration, Safety Training, and Emergency Response. It's a 24-hour program put on by the Buckeye Firearms Association in conjunction with a local firearms training facility, where they train faculty and staff to respond to active killer situation in our schools, and many of the schools in Ohio have adopted that. We need to move forward. After 9/11, we took control of the airports and we put security in the airports to clamp down on the problem. We need to put security, armed security, in the schools to clamp down on the problem. I hear people today, parents of some of the kids, and I understand their frustration. They're crying out for, why didn't we secure our schools? I ask the same questions. Why didn't we secure our schools? Why don't we secure our schools when we know they're a target-rich environment and subject to this kind of chaos? All the other solutions that people are recommending are nothing more than lip service. Arming staff, or having armed police officers, current service officers or retired, current service or retired military personnel, or I would even argue trained citizens who go through the requisite training and agree to serve in that capacity, just like they would if they were doing lunchroom duty or being a teacher's aide in a classroom. When they go to school that day, they're assisting in the security detail. So there are solutions. They don't want to address them because it doesn't meet the political agenda of some of the people that are in position to make the decision. Instead, they'd rather go with feel-good solutions, attack the object, the gun in this particular case, which they're going to have. It gains no traction because that's really not the problem, as I've mentioned. I mean, I'll leave you with this thought. Who would have ever thought that a pressure cooker would have been used to kill people in the Boston Marathon bombing a few years ago? The object wasn't the problem. It was the motivation and the mental state of the individual, and that's where our focus needs to be. If you want to comment on this, there's a comment section below this video. Feel free to do so. Also, tune in tomorrow, Saturday, February 17th, to Shooting from the Hip on WHIO, 95.7 FM, 1290 AM, to our weekly radio show where we're going to talk about this and other topics, and we'd be glad to have your input. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Jeff Pedro from SimTrainer.